Welcome back to SpeakWise podcast. Have you ever noticed that the more nervous you become, the more you start explaining yourself? You give reasons nobody asked for. You apologize when you have done nothing wrong. You add more details because you are afraid someone might misunderstand you. And strangely, the more you explain, the less confident you sometimes sound. Many people believe confidence means speaking more, but confident communication often means knowing when you have already said enough. Today, we are going to explore why emotionally confident people rarely feel the need to justify every decision they make, why over-explaining can quietly weaken your communication, and how you can express yourself clearly without becoming defensive. If you want to understand sophisticated American English and communicate with greater confidence, subscribe to SpeakWise podcast and join us for advanced C1-C2 English listening practice every week. Emma noticed the email at 8:17 on Monday morning. She had barely taken off her coat when the notification appeared on her laptop. The subject line was simple: Thursday, client presentation. She opened it while taking her first sip of coffee. Hey Emma, I noticed you moved the client presentation from Wednesday afternoon to Thursday morning. Was there a reason for the change? Daniel. Emma stared at the message. There was nothing particularly aggressive about it. Daniel was her colleague. They had worked together for almost 2 years. The presentation had originally been scheduled for Wednesday, but one of the senior analysts needed additional time to verify several financial projections. Emma had discussed the situation with the client on Friday. The client had agreed to Thursday. Everything had been handled professionally. There was no problem. And yet, Emma immediately felt the need to defend herself. She started typing. Hey Daniel. Yes. Sorry about that. I probably should have explained earlier. The reason I changed the presentation was because Rachel needed more time to review the financial projections, and since I knew the client was available Thursday morning, I thought it might make sense to move it. I hope that is okay. I did not mean to create any inconvenience, and I completely understand if you would have preferred Wednesday. I can try to change it back if necessary. I just thought Thursday might work better for everyone, but obviously I could be wrong. Emma stopped typing. She read the message again. Something felt wrong. She had made a reasonable decision. The client had agreed. The team had benefited. So why did her email sound as though she had done something wrong? She deleted the message. Then, she started again. Hey Danielle. Rachel needed an additional day to verify the financial projections, so I moved the presentation to Thursday after confirming the new time with the client. Thanks. Emma stared at the second version. 16 seconds passed. Then she deleted that one too. Too cold, she thought. She started typing a third version. By 8:24, she had written and deleted 5 different responses. Finally, someone behind her spoke. You look like you're negotiating a peace treaty. Emma turned around. Michael was standing beside her desk, holding a cup of coffee. She laughed. I'm answering an email. Michael looked at the screen. For 7 minutes? I don't know how to phrase it. What's the problem? Emma showed him Daniel's message. Michael read it. Then he looked at her. Where's the difficult part? Emma frowned. He asked why I changed the presentation. So tell him. I did. But? Emma hesitated. I don't want him to think I ignored him. Did you? No. Did you make the decision carelessly? No. Did the client complain? No. Then what exactly are you defending yourself against? Emma didn't answer. Michael smiled. Interesting. What? You've created an argument that hasn't happened. Emma looked back at the screen. The sentence stayed with her. You have created an argument that has not happened. She suddenly realized that Michael was right. Daniel had asked one question. Emma had imagined 5 accusations behind it. Why did you change the meeting? Had become, why didn't you consult me? Why are you making decisions without the team? Do you think your judgment is better than mine? Did you create a problem? Are you bad at your job? None of those questions had actually been asked. But Emma had responded emotionally as though they had. Michael pulled a chair toward her desk. Can I tell you something I learned embarrassingly late in my career? Emma smiled. Please, when someone asks you a simple question, answer the question they actually asked, not the 5 imaginary questions your anxiety added afterward. Emma laughed. That sounds obvious. It is obvious. Michael took another sip of coffee. And incredibly difficult. Emma looked at Daniel's email again. So what would you write? Michael shook his head. That's not the right question. Why not? Because if I write it for you, you're still looking for external approval. Emma raised an eyebrow. Okay. Then what's the right question? Michael smiled. What would you write if you weren't afraid Daniel might disagree with you? Emma paused. That changed everything. She placed her fingers on the keyboard. Rachel needed an additional day to verify the projections, so I moved the presentation to Thursday after confirming availability with the client. She looked at Michael. That's it? He shrugged. Is anything missing? Emma read it again. No. Is it accurate? Yes. Is it disrespectful? No. Then why add anything? Emma hesitated. Because it feels a little uncomfortable. Michael smiled. There it is. What? The real problem. He leaned back. You aren't struggling to explain your decision. You're struggling to tolerate the possibility that someone might not like it. Emma became quiet. That sentence landed harder than she expected. Michael continued. Those are completely different problems. Repeat after me. I can explain without defending myself. Repeat. Clear communication does not require endless justification. Repeat. Discomfort does not always mean I have done something wrong. Repeat. Excellent. Emma finally sent the email. For the next several minutes, she found herself checking her inbox. Nothing. At 8:41, Daniel replied. Makes sense. Thanks. Emma stared at the screen. 3 words. After nearly 20 minutes of internal debate, imaginary conflict, and 5 deleted responses, Daniel had simply written, Makes sense. Thanks. Michael was already walking away when Emma called after him. Michael. He turned. You were right. He smiled. Enjoy it. I don't hear that very often. Emma laughed. But the incident stayed in her mind for the rest of the morning. At lunch, she met Sarah, Alex, Sophia, and Michael at the cafe across the street. It was the same cafe where they often met after work. Warm sunlight filled the room. Soft music played in the background. Emma had barely sat down when Sarah noticed something. You look distracted. Emma smiled. I discovered something uncomfortable about myself this morning. Alex immediately leaned forward. Those are usually the best discoveries. Emma laughed. I'm not sure I agree. Sarah smiled. What happened? Emma told them about Daniel's email. She described the 5 responses, the apologies, the explanations, the imaginary accusations. When she finished, Sophia smiled knowingly. You over-explained. Emma nodded. Apparently, Alex laughed. I do that constantly. Michael looked at him. You absolutely do. Everyone laughed. Alex pointed at Michael. That sounded judgmental. It was observational. Sarah smiled. Why do you think people over-explain? Emma answered immediately. Because they want to be understood. Sophia tilted her head. Is that always true? Emma thought for a moment. Maybe they want to avoid being misunderstood. Closer, Sophia replied. Alex added. Or, they want approval. The table became quieter. Sarah nodded. I think that's often underneath it. When we're secure in a decision, we can explain it clearly, but when we're emotionally uncertain, we start adding layers. Reasons. Apologies. Disclaimers. Justifications. We're not really communicating anymore. We're asking the other person for permission to feel okay about our own decision. Emma slowly nodded. That describes my email perfectly. Michael smiled. You weren't telling Daniel what happened. You were trying to control how he interpreted what happened. Emma looked surprised. Isn't that part of communication? To some extent, Sarah replied. But there's a limit. You can choose your words carefully. You can provide context. You can be respectful. But you cannot completely control another person's interpretation, Sophia added. And trying to control it often makes you sound less certain. Alex looked curious. Why? Because confidence usually sounds concise. Sophia paused. Insecurity often keeps talking. Nobody spoke for a moment. Emma looked down at her coffee. That's painfully accurate. Repeat after me. Confidence can be concise. Repeat. I do not need to control every interpretation. Repeat. I can be respectful without seeking permission. Repeat. Excellent. Sarah looked at Emma. Let me ask you something. If Daniel had disliked your decision, would that automatically mean your decision was wrong? Emma shook her head. No. If he had questioned it? No. If he had disagreed with you? Emma paused. No. Sarah smiled. Then maybe confidence isn't believing everyone will agree with you. Maybe confidence is knowing disagreement won't destroy you. Alex leaned back. That's a much harder definition of confidence. Michael nodded. But probably a more useful one. Sophia looked around the table. A lot of people appear confident when everyone agrees with them. Real confidence becomes visible when someone doesn't. Emma thought about that. At work, she often felt confident when presenting ideas she knew the team supported. But when someone challenged her, something changed. Her sentences became longer. Her voice became softer. She started saying things like, I could be wrong. Maybe I misunderstood. I'm sorry if this doesn't make sense. Obviously, this is just my opinion. She had always considered those phrases polite. Now she wondered how often they were actually expressions of uncertainty. Sarah seemed to read her thoughts. Politeness and self-doubt can sound surprisingly similar. Emma looked at her. How do you tell the difference? Attention, Sarah replied. If you say, I could be wrong, because you genuinely recognize uncertainty, that's intellectual humility. But if you say it every time you express an opinion, because you're afraid someone might challenge you, that's something else. Michael nodded. You're weakening your own sentence before anyone else gets the chance. Alex smiled. It's like arguing against yourself. Exactly, Sarah replied. Advanced communication isn't about removing every softening phrase. It's about using them deliberately. Native speakers soften statements all the time. But confident speakers know why they're doing it. Sophia added, they soften the tone, not their entire existence. Everyone laughed. Emma smiled. I'm going to remember that. Today's native tip. In advanced American English, confident speakers often distinguish between explaining and justifying. Explaining provides relevant context. Justifying keeps adding reasons because the speaker feels pressure to prove that their choice is acceptable. Compare these two responses. I moved the meeting because the client needed additional preparation time. And I moved the meeting because the client needed more time, and I hope that's okay, and I didn't mean to cause any problems, and I can change it back if you think that would be better. The first response provides information. The second may unintentionally communicate anxiety and a need for approval. This does not mean you should always speak briefly. Complex situations sometimes require detailed explanations. The key is to ask yourself whether each additional sentence adds useful information or merely reduces your anxiety. Repeat after me. Here is the reason I made that decision. Repeat. I understand your concern. Repeat. I considered the alternatives before deciding. Repeat. I'm comfortable with the decision. Repeat. Excellent. Now it's time for today's listening challenge. Listen carefully. Michael tells Emma, you aren't struggling to explain your decision. You're struggling to tolerate the possibility that someone might not like it. What does he mean? A. Emma does not know why she changed the presentation. B. Emma's real difficulty is accepting possible disagreement rather than finding the correct explanation. C. Emma should ignore other people's opinions completely. The correct answer is B. Excellent. Emma took another sip of coffee and looked around the table. For years, she had believed that being a good communicator meant making sure nobody misunderstood her. Now, she was beginning to recognize the impossible burden hidden inside that goal. Perhaps clear communication was not about eliminating every possible misunderstanding. Perhaps it was about saying what needed to be said, with enough clarity, respect, and confidence to let the other person respond, however they chose. And for Emma, that was a much more difficult skill than simply learning what words to use. The conversation continued as the cafe slowly filled with the quiet noise of the lunch crowd. Emma was still thinking about Sarah's words. Confidence becomes visible when someone disagrees with you. It sounded simple, but Emma knew that disagreement was exactly where her confidence usually disappeared. Alex broke the silence. I think there's another reason people over-explain. Sarah looked at him. What is it? Guilt. Sophia nodded immediately. Even when they haven't actually done anything wrong. Exactly. Alex leaned forward. Last month, a friend invited me to a birthday dinner. I couldn't go, because I already had plans with my family. Emma smiled. That sounds reasonable. It was. But instead of saying, thanks for inviting me, I already have plans that evening, so I won't be able to make it. I wrote an entire paragraph. Michael laughed. How long? Embarrassingly long. Everyone smiled. Alex continued. I explained where I was going, why the family event mattered, when we'd arranged it, why I couldn't move it. Then I apologized 3 times. Sophia laughed softly. For declining a birthday invitation? Apparently. Sarah smiled. What were you afraid would happen? Alex thought about it. I suppose I was afraid he'd think I didn't care about him. Emma nodded. That's exactly what I do. Alex continued. So I kept adding explanations. But when I read the message afterward, it sounded like I was defending myself in court. Michael smiled. That's because you weren't simply declining an invitation. You were trying to guarantee that your friend wouldn't feel disappointed. Alex nodded. Exactly. Sarah looked around the table. And that's another impossible goal. You can communicate kindly. You can acknowledge someone's feelings. But you cannot live your life without occasionally disappointing people. The table became quiet. Emma looked at Sarah. That sounds harsh. Sarah smiled. It can. But think about the alternative. If avoiding disappointment becomes your highest priority, you eventually start making decisions based entirely on other people's reactions. Sophia nodded. And then resentment begins. Emma looked at her. Why resentment? Because you're saying yes when you want to say no. You're agreeing when you actually disagree. You're accepting responsibilities you don't have time for. And, eventually, you become frustrated with people for expectations you never challenged. Michael smiled. That's important. Sometimes resentment is a boundary that was never communicated. Emma slowly repeated the sentence. A boundary that was never communicated. Sophia nodded. Exactly. Repeat after me. I can say no respectfully. Repeat. Disappointing someone does not automatically mean disrespecting them. Repeat. Clear boundaries protect healthy relationships. Repeat. Excellent. Sarah looked at Alex. So how could you have responded differently? Alex thought for a moment. Maybe. Thanks for thinking of me. I already have family plans that evening, so I won't be able to make it. I hope you have a great birthday. Sarah smiled. How does that feel? Uncomfortable. Everyone laughed. Michael pointed toward him. Which probably means we're getting somewhere. Alex laughed too. But it feels incomplete. Sophia looked at him. What's missing? I don't know. Maybe proof that I have a legitimate reason. Sarah nodded. And there it is again. The need to prove legitimacy. Emma looked interested. Why do we do that? Sarah paused before answering. Because many of us learned that no wasn't enough. The table became noticeably quieter. She continued. Maybe as children, we were expected to explain every decision. Maybe we learned that disagreement created conflict. Maybe saying no made someone angry. Maybe being agreeable helped us feel safe. Those habits can follow us into adulthood. Michael nodded. And then we start treating ordinary preferences as though they require legal evidence. Alex smiled. I've definitely done that. Emma looked down. So have I. Sophia spoke gently. But understanding where the habit comes from doesn't mean blaming the past. It simply gives us the opportunity to choose differently now. Sarah nodded. Exactly. Awareness creates choice. Repeat after me. No can be a complete answer. Repeat. I can be kind and still have boundaries. Repeat. My preferences do not always require justification. Repeat. Excellent. Emma looked unconvinced. I understand the principle. But isn't saying no without explaining yourself sometimes rude? Absolutely, Michael replied. Emma looked surprised. So, how do you know when to explain? Michael smiled. Context. Sarah nodded. This is where mature communication becomes nuanced. Confidence isn't about becoming rigid. It's not about responding to every request with, no, that's my decision, and walking away. Everyone laughed. That isn't confidence. That's poor communication. Sophia added, the goal isn't to explain less. It's to explain appropriately. Emma leaned forward. What does appropriately mean? Sarah thought for a moment. Ask yourself 3 questions. Does this person reasonably deserve context? Will additional information help them understand the situation? And am I explaining because it's useful? Or because I'm anxious? Emma nodded slowly. Michael added, if you're canceling an important commitment at the last minute, context matters. If you're changing something that affects an entire team, context matters. If your decision has consequences for someone else, context matters. But if someone asks why you don't want another drink, Alex laughed. You probably don't need a 5-minute explanation. Exactly, Michael replied. Sophia smiled. Healthy confidence understands responsibility without accepting unnecessary guilt. Sarah looked at Emma. That's the balance. Not defensiveness. Not indifference. Accountability. Emma smiled. That's much more complicated than just saying speak confidently. Sarah laughed. Welcome to C1-C2 communication. Everyone smiled. Repeat after me. Context matters. Repeat. I take responsibility without taking unnecessary blame. Repeat. Confidence and accountability can exist together. Repeat. Excellent. Michael placed his coffee on the table. There's another phrase people use constantly when they're over-explaining. Emma looked at him. Which one? Sorry. Everyone immediately laughed. Alex raised his hand. Guilty. Sophia smiled. We all are. Michael looked at Emma. How many times do you think you apologize in an average day? Emma laughed. I have no idea. Probably too many. Sarah smiled. Let's test it. She looked at Emma. Imagine you're walking through the office, and someone is standing in front of the printer. You need to reach something beside them. What do you say? Sorry, can I just grab that? Sarah nodded. Why are you sorry? Emma laughed. I'm not. Exactly. Sophia added. You could simply say, excuse me, could I grab that? Emma nodded. Sarah continued. Now imagine you're in a meeting, and you have a different opinion. What might you say? Emma thought for a moment. Sorry, but I don't completely agree. Michael smiled. Again. Emma laughed. I'm apologizing for having an opinion. Exactly. Sarah replied. Sometimes, sorry is genuine. Sometimes, it's social lubrication. And sometimes, it's a tiny request for permission. Sophia nodded. We apologize before occupying space, before asking questions, before disagreeing, before setting boundaries, before expressing needs. Emma became thoughtful. I do that constantly. Sarah smiled. A lot of thoughtful people do. The goal isn't to eliminate apologies. A sincere apology is one of the most important tools in communication, but apologies lose meaning when we use them for everything. Michael nodded. If you hurt someone, apologize. If you break a commitment, apologize. If you make a meaningful mistake, apologize. But you don't need to apologize for respectfully existing. Alex laughed. That's going on my wall. Repeat after me. Excuse me. Could I ask something? Repeat. I see it differently. Repeat. I won't be able to make it. Repeat. Thank you for understanding. Repeat. Excellent. Emma suddenly remembered something. Wait. What? Sarah asked. I did this yesterday. My manager asked whether I could finish another report by Friday. I already had 3 deadlines. So I said, I'm really sorry, and I completely understand that this is important, and I'll definitely try, but I'm not sure I'll be able to finish everything, although I can probably work late Thursday, and maybe. Michael interrupted gently. What did you actually mean? Emma sighed. I didn't have enough time. Sarah smiled. So, what could you have said? Emma thought carefully. I can take that on, but given my current deadlines, I would need until Monday. Michael nodded. Much clearer, Sophia added. And notice something important. You didn't just say no. You communicated capacity. You offered an alternative. You respected both yourself and the work. Emma smiled. And I didn't apologize. Sarah nodded. Because capacity isn't a moral failure. The sentence made Emma pause. Capacity isn't a moral failure. She had never thought about it that way. She often treated being unavailable as though she had failed someone. Being tired felt like failure. Being busy felt like failure. Needing more time felt like failure. Saying no felt selfish. And every one of those feelings produced another explanation. Michael watched her expression. Something clicked, didn't it? Emma nodded. I think I've been using explanations to make my boundaries feel more acceptable. Sophia smiled. That's a powerful realization. Emma looked around the table. So what happens when someone doesn't accept the boundary? No one answered immediately. Sarah slowly smiled. Now we're getting to the difficult part. Emma raised an eyebrow. Everything before this wasn't the difficult part? Everyone laughed. Sarah shook her head. No? Setting a boundary when people respect it is easy. The real test begins when someone pushes back. Alex nodded. That's when I usually collapse. Michael smiled. Most people do. Sarah leaned forward. Because the moment someone challenges our decision, we assume we need a stronger explanation. But sometimes, the explanation isn't the problem. The other person simply doesn't like the answer. The table went quiet. Emma looked at Sarah. And those are different things. Completely different, Sarah replied. If someone doesn't understand you, clarification may help. If someone understands you perfectly, but wants you to change your answer, more explanation may simply give them more material to argue with. Alex slowly nodded. That's incredibly true. Sophia added. Sometimes we keep explaining because we think understanding will create agreement. But people can understand you completely and still disagree. Repeat after me. Understanding does not guarantee agreement. Repeat. I can clarify without surrendering my position. Repeat. Disagreement does not require endless explanation. Repeat. Excellent. Emma sat quietly for several seconds. She thought about Daniel's email again. But now, she was thinking about something much larger. How many times had she explained herself, not because people misunderstood her, but because she couldn't tolerate their disagreement? How many times had she apologized, simply because another person was disappointed? How many times had she confused being kind with making herself endlessly available? Sarah looked at her. What are you thinking? Emma smiled. I'm wondering how many hours of my life I've spent explaining decisions that were already clear. Alex laughed. Probably enough for a second career. Everyone laughed. But Emma knew the question was serious. Today's native tip. Advanced English speakers often use calm, concise phrases when maintaining a position after someone pushes back. Instead of repeating a long explanation, you might say, I understand where you're coming from, but this is what works for me. Or, I appreciate your perspective. My decision hasn't changed. Or I understand that this may be disappointing, but I won't be able to commit to that. Notice that these phrases acknowledge the other person's perspective without automatically surrendering your own. This is called assertive communication. Assertiveness is different from aggression. Aggression dismisses the other person's needs. Passivity dismisses your own. Assertiveness respects both. Repeat after me. I understand where you're coming from. Repeat. I appreciate your perspective. Repeat. My decision hasn't changed. Repeat. I won't be able to commit to that. Repeat. Excellent. Now it's time for today's listening challenge. Listen carefully. Sophia says, sometimes we keep explaining because we think understanding will create agreement, but people can understand you completely and still disagree. What does she mean? A. If people disagree with you, you have probably explained yourself badly. B. Clear communication does not guarantee that another person will share your opinion or approve of your decision. C. Confident people should never explain their decisions. The correct answer is B. Excellent. As Emma listened to the conversation around her, she began to recognize that confidence wasn't about becoming colder, it wasn't about caring less, and it certainly wasn't about refusing to explain anything. It was about learning the difference between responsibility and guilt, between kindness and people-pleasing, between clarification and justification, and, perhaps most importantly, between wanting to be understood and needing to be approved. Sarah let the final sentence settle. Wanting to be understood and needing to be approved were not the same thing. Emma knew that intellectually. Emotionally, however, the distinction was much harder. She looked around the table. Can I ask something? Sarah smiled. Of course. What if the person pushing back is your boss? Alex laughed. There it is. Michael smiled. The question everyone was waiting for. Emma continued. It's easy to talk about boundaries with friends or invitations, but at work, there are consequences. Sarah nodded. Absolutely. And that's where simplistic advice becomes dangerous. Emma looked interested. What do you mean? Telling people to just stop explaining themselves sounds empowering, but real life has hierarchies, responsibilities, power dynamics, professional expectations. Sometimes you absolutely should explain your reasoning. Sophia added, the skill isn't refusing to explain. It's knowing how to explain without sounding defensive. Michael nodded. There's a huge difference. Emma leaned forward. What does that difference sound like? Michael thought for a moment. Imagine your manager questions a decision. A defensive response might sound like this. I only did it because nobody gave me clear instructions, and I thought this was what everyone wanted. And honestly, I was just trying to help. He paused. A confident response might be, I made that decision based on the information available at the time. Looking back, there are two things I'd handle differently. Emma nodded slowly. The second one sounds much stronger. Sarah smiled. Because it doesn't run away from responsibility. It owns the decision. Sophia added. And it doesn't collapse into shame. Alex looked thoughtful. So, confidence isn't saying I was right. No, Sarah replied. Sometimes confidence sounds like, I was wrong. The table became quiet. Emma raised her eyebrows. Really? Sarah nodded. One of the strongest sentences you can say is, I got that wrong. Michael smiled. No excuses. No dramatic explanation. No attempt to protect your image. Just ownership. Sophia nodded. People often over-explain mistakes because they're trying to separate the mistake from their identity. Emma looked confused. What do you mean? They think, if I made a bad decision, people might think I'm incompetent. If I forgot something, people might think I'm careless. If I misunderstood something, people might think I'm unintelligent. So instead of addressing the mistake, they start defending who they are. Sarah nodded. And that's when a 30-second conversation becomes 10 minutes. Alex laughed. I've definitely turned small mistakes into documentaries. Everyone laughed. Emma smiled. So what should we do instead? Sarah answered calmly. Separate behavior from identity. You made a mistake. That doesn't mean you are a mistake. You misunderstood something. That doesn't mean you're unintelligent. You made a poor decision. That doesn't mean every decision you make is poor. Michael added, when you don't need to protect your entire identity, you can address the actual problem much more calmly. Repeat after me. I got that wrong. Repeat. I take responsibility for that. Repeat. Here's how I'll correct it. Repeat. One mistake does not define my ability. Repeat. Excellent. Alex looked at Michael. Have you ever had to do that at work? Michael laughed. More times than I'd like to admit. Tell us one. Michael took a sip of coffee. A few years ago, I approved a project timeline that was completely unrealistic. I wanted to impress a new client. I knew the schedule was aggressive, but I convinced myself the team could handle it. Sophia raised an eyebrow. Could they? Not even close. Everyone laughed. Michael smiled. 2 weeks later, everything was behind schedule. My director called me into his office. Emma looked interested. Were you nervous? Terrified. What did you say? Michael smiled. I had prepared an entire speech. Market conditions. Unexpected client revisions. Staffing problems. Technical delays. I had an explanation for everything. Alex laughed. That sounds familiar. Michael nodded. But before the meeting, an older colleague stopped me. He asked, did those things contribute to the problem? I said yes. Then he asked, but who approved the timeline? I said, I did. He looked at me and said, then start there. Nobody spoke. Michael continued. So I walked into the meeting and said, I approved a timeline that was too aggressive. There were unexpected complications, but the original commitment was my responsibility. I've revised the schedule and identified what we need to change. Emma smiled. What happened? My director looked at me for a few seconds. Then he said, good. Show me the new plan. Alex laughed. That's it? That's it. Michael nodded. The conversation I had feared all morning lasted about 15 minutes. Sarah smiled. Because accountability reduces friction. Emma looked at her. How? When people don't have to fight you to acknowledge reality, they can focus on solving the problem. Sophia nodded. Defensiveness turns problems into battles. Accountability turns them into information. Repeat after me. I can acknowledge a mistake without attacking myself. Repeat. Accountability builds trust. Repeat. Let's focus on what we can do next. Repeat. Excellent. Emma stared at the table for a moment. I think I understand why over-explaining can make people trust you less. Sarah looked at her. Tell me. Because sometimes, it sounds like you're trying to escape responsibility. Michael nodded. Exactly. Even when that isn't your intention. Sophia added. And sometimes, excessive explanation creates suspicion. Alex laughed. That's true. If someone gives me 12 reasons for something I didn't question, I suddenly start wondering why there are 12 reasons. Everyone smiled. Sarah nodded. That's another important communication principle. More information doesn't always create more credibility. Sometimes clarity creates credibility. Emma smiled. Say enough. Then stop. Exactly. Sarah replied. The cafe door opened, and a group of office workers entered. Their voices briefly filled the room before they moved toward a table near the back. Emma watched them for a moment. Then her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. Daniel. She opened the message. Can we talk about Thursday's presentation when you're back? I have a concern about the revised schedule. Emma froze. Alex noticed immediately. What's wrong? She turned the phone around. Everyone read the message. Michael smiled. Perfect timing. Emma looked horrified. Perfect for you. Everyone laughed. Sarah smiled. What are you feeling? My stomach just dropped. Why? Because he has a concern. Sarah nodded. And what does that mean? Emma opened her mouth. Then stopped. She knew exactly what Sarah was doing. It means he has a concern. Anything else? No. Does it mean you made the wrong decision? No. Does it mean he's angry? I don't know. Does it mean you need to prepare a 15-minute defense? Emma laughed. Probably not. Michael smiled. Look at you. Progress. Emma put her phone down. But I still want to prepare. Sarah nodded. You should. Emma looked surprised. I should? Of course. Confidence doesn't mean walking into important conversations unprepared. It means preparing for the facts, not rehearsing imaginary accusations. Emma smiled. Okay. So what should I prepare? Sophia answered. Your reasoning. Michael added. The impact of the decision. Alex said. Possible alternative. Sarah finished. And genuine questions. Emma looked at her. Question? Absolutely. If Daniel has a concern, your job isn't only to defend your decision. It's to understand his concern. Emma nodded slowly. So instead of immediately explaining, I could ask him what specifically worries him. Sarah smiled. Exactly. Michael added. Confident communication isn't a monologue. It's a conversation. Repeat after me. What specifically concerns you? Repeat. Help me understand your perspective. Repeat. Here's what I considered when making the decision. Repeat. Let's look at the options. Repeat. Excellent. Sophia looked at Emma. There's something else worth remembering. What? If Daniel makes a good point, you are allowed to change your mind. Emma smiled. Wouldn't that make me look uncertain? Sophia shook her head. Not if you change your mind for a clear reason. Sarah nodded. Confidence isn't stubbornness. Stubbornness says, I must defend my original position because changing it will make me look weak. Confidence says, if new information changes the situation, I'll adjust. Michael smiled. That's intellectual flexibility. Alex added, and it's surprisingly rare. Emma looked thoughtful. So, a confident person can say, you make a good point. I hadn't considered that. Sarah smiled. Absolutely. Or, given that information, I think we should reconsider. Sophia nodded. Changing your mind because of better evidence isn't weakness. It's rational thinking. Repeat after me. That's a fair point. Repeat. I hadn't considered that. Repeat. Given that information, I'd reconsider my position. Repeat. Changing my mind does not mean losing confidence. Repeat. Excellent. Emma picked up her phone again. The message from Daniel no longer looked threatening. It was simply an invitation to a conversation. Maybe Daniel disagreed. Maybe he had information she didn't have. Maybe Emma's decision was still the best option. She didn't know yet. And for once, she didn't need to know before the conversation happened. Sarah noticed the change in her expression. You look calmer. Emma smiled. I realized something. What? I don't need to prepare for winning the conversation. I need to prepare for having it. Michael smiled. That's a much better goal. Today's native tip. At the C1-C2 level, confident disagreement often sounds collaborative rather than confrontational. Instead of saying, you're wrong, you might say, I see the situation differently. Instead of immediately defending yourself, you might ask, what specifically concerns you? And when someone presents useful information, you can say, that's a fair point. I hadn't considered that. These expressions allow you to maintain confidence while remaining intellectually flexible. The goal is not to protect your position at all costs. The goal is to reach the clearest understanding possible. Repeat after me. I see the situation differently. Repeat. What specifically concerns you? Repeat. That's a fair point. Repeat. Let's look at this from another angle. Repeat. Excellent. Now it's time for today's listening challenge. Listen carefully. Sarah tells Emma, prepare for the facts, not imaginary accusations. What does she mean? A. Emma should enter the meeting without preparing anything. B. Emma should prepare relevant information and reasoning instead of mentally defending herself against criticisms Daniel has not actually made. C. Emma should assume Daniel agrees with everything she has done. The correct answer is B. Excellent. Emma put her phone back on the table. The meeting with Daniel would happen in less than an hour. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about the perfect explanation. She wasn't searching for the perfect defense. She wasn't trying to predict every possible reaction. She was preparing to listen, to explain what mattered, to acknowledge anything she had missed, and to let the conversation unfold without trying to control every outcome. Perhaps that was what confidence really looked like. Not certainty, not dominance, not having the perfect answer ready, but trusting yourself enough to enter a difficult conversation without rehearsing your innocence beforehand. At 1:47, Emma walked back into the office. Daniel's message was still open on her phone. Can we talk about Thursday's presentation when you're back? I have a concern about the revised schedule. An hour earlier, those words had felt threatening. Now they felt different. They were still uncomfortable, but discomfort no longer felt like danger. Emma placed her bag beside her desk and opened the presentation materials. She reviewed the timeline, the financial projections, the client's availability, Rachel's request for additional time. Then she stopped. Normally, she would have started preparing arguments. She would have imagined Daniel challenging her. She would have rehearsed explanations. She would have created answers for questions that had never been asked. Instead, she wrote 3 sentences in her notebook. Understand the concern. Explain my reasoning clearly. Stay open to new information. That was enough. At exactly 2 o'clock, Daniel appeared beside her desk. Do you have a minute? Emma felt the familiar tension in her chest. Sure. They walked into a small conference room. Daniel closed the door and sat across from her. For several seconds, he looked through his notes. Emma resisted the urge to start explaining. That alone felt like progress. Finally, Daniel looked up. I wanted to talk about Thursday. Emma nodded. Sure. What specifically concerns you? Daniel paused. The client is available Thursday morning, but Rachel told me the final projections might not be ready until late Wednesday. Emma listened. Daniel continued. If anything unexpected comes up during the final review, we'll have almost no time to respond before the presentation. Emma felt the immediate impulse to defend her decision. She wanted to say, I know, but Rachel originally told me she only needed one more day, and the client said Thursday was fine, and I was trying to make sure everyone had enough time. The entire explanation appeared in her mind almost automatically, but she didn't say it. Instead, she asked, Are you mainly concerned about the lack of buffer time? Daniel nodded. Exactly. Emma looked at the schedule. That's fair. Daniel seemed slightly surprised. Emma continued. When I moved the meeting, I was focused on giving Rachel another day and keeping the client on schedule. She paused. I didn't fully account for what happens if the review identifies another problem Wednesday evening. Daniel nodded. That's my concern. Emma looked at the calendar again. What would you suggest? Daniel turned his laptop toward her. I checked with the client. They can also do Thursday afternoon. If we move it to 3, we gain another 6 hours. Emma considered the suggestion. It was better. Simple as that. 6 hours would give the team time to respond if Rachel discovered anything during the final review. A strange feeling appeared in Emma's mind. Part of her wanted to defend the original schedule anyway, not because it was better, but because it had been her decision. She recognized the impulse immediately. Sarah's words returned. Confidence isn't stubbornness. Emma looked at Daniel. That makes sense. Let's move it to 3. Daniel nodded. Great. Then he closed his laptop. The conversation seemed finished. Emma almost laughed. That's it? Daniel looked confused. What do you mean? Nothing. Emma smiled. I just thought this conversation might be more complicated. Daniel laughed. I was only worried about the buffer. Emma nodded. Got it. As they stood up, Daniel stopped. By the way, moving it off Wednesday was the right call. Emma looked at him. It was? Definitely. Rachel needed the extra time. I just wanted a few more hours on Thursday. Emma smiled. Thanks. They walked out of the conference room. The entire conversation had lasted less than 8 minutes. No argument. No accusation. No confrontation. Just information. A concern. A better solution. And a decision. Emma returned to her desk and sat down. She opened her notebook. Under the 3 sentences she had written earlier, she added another. Not every disagreement is a conflict. Repeat after me. Not every disagreement is a conflict. Repeat. I can listen without becoming defensive. Repeat. New information can improve my decisions. Repeat. Excellent. At 5:30, Emma returned to the cafe. Sarah was already there. Michael arrived a few minutes later, followed by Sophia and Alex. Alex barely sat down, before asking, So? Emma smiled. So what? The meeting. Emma laughed. I survived. Michael looked dramatically relieved. Thank goodness. Everyone laughed. Sarah smiled. What happened? Emma explained the conversation. She told them about Daniel's concern, the lack of buffer time, the alternative schedule, and her decision to move the presentation to Thursday afternoon. When she finished, Sarah asked, What was the hardest part? Emma thought for a moment. Not defending myself immediately. Sophia nodded. That's difficult. I could feel the explanation forming in my head. Emma continued. I wanted to tell him everything I'd considered. I wanted him to know I hadn't been careless. But then I realized he wasn't accusing me of being careless. Michael smiled. So you answered the conversation that was actually happening. Exactly, Emma replied. Not the one happening inside my head. Alex laughed. That might solve half of humanity's communication problems. Sarah smiled. Probably more than half. Emma took a sip of coffee. But something else happened. What? Sophia asked. When Daniel suggested moving the presentation to 3, I immediately knew his idea was better. But part of me still wanted to defend my original decision. Michael nodded knowingly. Ego. Emma laughed. Apparently. Sarah smiled. That's completely normal. Once we publicly choose a position, we become psychologically attached to it. Alex leaned forward. Why? Because changing our mind can feel like losing. Sarah replied. Especially if we associate confidence with always being right. Sophia nodded. But confidence isn't consistency at all costs. It's consistency with reality. Emma looked at her. Consistency with reality. Sophia smiled. If the evidence changes, your conclusion should be allowed to change. Michael added. Otherwise, you're not defending an idea anymore. You're defending your identity. Repeat after me. I don't need to be right all the time. Repeat. Better information can change my mind. Repeat. Changing my position can be a sign of strength. Repeat. Excellent. Alex leaned back. I think this explains a lot of arguments online. Everyone laughed. Sarah smiled. How so? People stop discussing ideas. They start defending identities. If you challenge someone's opinion, they hear, "You're stupid," or "You're a bad person." Michael nodded. And then the conversation becomes emotional. Sophia added, because the disagreement is no longer about the subject. It's about self-worth. Emma looked thoughtful. So how do you separate your opinion from your identity? Sarah paused. By remembering that your beliefs are tools, not possessions. Alex raised an eyebrow. Explain that. Sarah smiled. If you treat an idea like a possession, you protect it. If you treat an idea like a tool, you evaluate whether it still works. Michael nodded. That's powerful. Sarah continued. Imagine discovering that a map you're using is inaccurate. Would you keep following it because you've already walked 5 miles? Emma laughed. Hopefully not. Exactly. Sarah replied. You'd update the map, but people don't always do that with beliefs. We sometimes continue defending an idea because we've already invested so much time in believing it. Sophia smiled. There's a phrase for that. Sunk cost. Michael nodded. The tendency to continue investing in something because of what we've already invested. Sarah smiled. And while we often discuss sunk costs in economics or business, they appear in conversations too. Emma looked curious. How? We defend positions long after we realize they're weak, because admitting that feels expensive. It costs pride. It costs certainty. Sometimes it costs status. Alex smiled. So we keep arguing. Exactly. Sarah replied, not because the argument is strong, but because retreat feels emotionally expensive. Repeat after me. My opinions are allowed to evolve. Repeat. I value truth more than being right. Repeat. Changing my mind is not the same as losing. Repeat. Excellent. Michael looked at Emma. There's another thing you did well today. Emma smiled. Only one? Everyone laughed. You asked Daniel a question. What specifically concerns you? Emma nodded. Sarah suggested that. Michael smiled. That question probably saved you 10 minutes of unnecessary explanation. Sophia agreed. Specific questions reduce vague anxiety. Emma looked interested. What do you mean? If someone says, I don't like this, your mind can imagine 100 reasons. But if you ask, which part concerns you? The uncertainty becomes smaller. Sarah nodded. Clarity is often the antidote to defensiveness. Alex smiled. I like that. Sarah continued. When we don't understand someone's criticism, we often defend everything. But when we identify the specific issue, we can respond specifically. Michael added. Instead of defending your entire character, Emma laughed. Which apparently I enjoy doing. Everyone smiled. Repeat after me. What specifically concerns you? Repeat. Which part would you change? Repeat. Can you help me understand your reasoning? Repeat. Excellent. Sophia looked at Emma. What would the old version of you have done in that meeting? Emma didn't need much time to answer. I would have started talking before Daniel finished. I would have explained why I moved the presentation. I would have told him, the client agreed. I would have reminded him that Rachel needed more time. I probably would have apologized. Alex smiled. And then? Emma laughed. Then Daniel would have tried to explain his actual concern. And I might have interpreted that as more criticism. Michael nodded, which would have produced more explanation. Exactly. Sarah smiled. And suddenly, an 8-minute conversation becomes 40 minutes. Emma nodded. Or worse. Sophia looked thoughtful. This is why emotional regulation is such an important part of advanced communication. Emma looked at her. What does emotional regulation have to do with language? Almost everything. Sophia replied. When you're emotionally activated, your vocabulary may still be excellent. Your grammar may still be perfect, but your ability to interpret intention changes. Sarah nodded. You hear criticism, where there may only be curiosity. You hear rejection, where there may only be disagreement. You hear hostility, where there may only be directness. Michael added. And then you respond to what you feel, rather than what was actually said. Emma became quiet. That described more than one conversation from her past. Sarah continued. At an advanced level, English isn't simply about understanding words. It's about interpreting tone, context, intent, implication, and your own emotional reaction. Alex smiled. So C1, C2 listening is partly listening to yourself. Sarah nodded. Absolutely. Sometimes the most important thing to notice during a conversation is what your mind is adding to it. Repeat after me. I respond to what was actually said. Repeat. I separate facts from assumptions. Repeat. I can pause before reacting. Repeat. Excellent. The evening crowd began arriving at the cafe. Someone opened the door, and a cool breeze briefly moved through the room. Emma looked outside. I think I finally understand why confident people don't explain themselves too much. Sarah smiled. Tell us. It's not because they don't care what anyone thinks. It's because they trust themselves enough to tolerate uncertainty. Michael nodded. Emma continued. They know someone might misunderstand them. Someone might disagree. Someone might even dislike their decision. But they don't immediately treat those possibilities as emergencies. Sophia smiled. Exactly. Sarah added. And because they aren't constantly defending themselves, they have more attention available for something much more useful. Emma looked curious. What? Listening. The table became quiet. Sarah smiled. When you're busy protecting your image, you can't fully hear the other person. But when your sense of self isn't constantly under threat, you can become curious. Michael nodded. And curiosity changes the entire conversation. Today's native tip. In advanced professional English, questions can help you respond to criticism without becoming defensive. If someone says, I don't think this approach will work, instead of immediately explaining why they're wrong, you might say, what specifically concerns you about the approach? Or, which part do you think creates the greatest risk? If someone raises a valid point, you can respond with, that's fair. I hadn't considered that factor. These phrases communicate confidence because they show that you can examine criticism without treating it as a personal attack. Repeat after me. What specifically concerns you? Repeat. Which part creates the greatest risk? Repeat. That's fair. Repeat. I hadn't considered that factor. Repeat. Excellent. Now it's time for today's listening challenge. Listen carefully. Sarah says, sometimes the most important thing to notice during a conversation is what your mind is adding to it. What does she mean? A. People should ignore their emotions completely. B. Our assumptions, fears, and insecurities can add meanings that the other person never actually expressed. C. Advanced speakers should analyze every sentence for hidden criticism. The correct answer is B. Excellent. Emma looked down at the sentence she had written earlier. Not every disagreement is a conflict. She added one more beneath it. Not every question is an accusation. Then another. Not every change of mind is a defeat. She closed the notebook. For years, Emma had thought confidence meant finding stronger arguments. Now she was beginning to understand something much more subtle. Sometimes, confidence meant having enough inner stability to stop arguing with threats that existed only in your imagination. And sometimes, the strongest response wasn't another explanation. It was simply the willingness to listen. By the time the evening crowd settled into the cafe, Emma's notebook was closed. She wasn't taking notes anymore. She was simply listening. The conversation had changed something in her. Not dramatically. She still knew that the next difficult email might make her nervous. The next disagreement might still trigger the urge to defend herself. The next request she wanted to decline might still make her search for 10 different explanations. But now she could recognize the pattern. And sometimes, recognizing a pattern was the beginning of changing it. Sarah looked around the table. I think there's one final question we haven't asked. Alex smiled. Of course there is. Everyone laughed. Sarah turned toward Emma. What do you think would happen if you stopped trying to make everyone understand you perfectly? Emma didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her empty coffee cup. I think I'd have a lot more energy. Michael smiled. That's probably true. Emma continued. I spend so much time imagining what people might think. If I say no, will they think I'm selfish? If I disagree, will they think I'm difficult? If I make a mistake, will they think I'm incompetent? If I change my mind, will they think I'm weak? She paused. And then I try to manage all those possibilities with explanations. Sophia nodded. Which is exhausting. Completely, Emma replied. Sarah leaned forward slightly. What if you accepted that some people will misunderstand you? Emma looked at her. That sounds uncomfortable. It is. Sarah smiled. But adulthood contains a lot of uncomfortable truths. Alex laughed softly. That's one way to put it. Sarah continued. You can communicate clearly, You can be considerate. You can listen. You can correct misunderstandings when necessary. But eventually, you have to let people form their own opinions. Michael nodded. Otherwise, you're not communicating. You're managing perception. Emma became quiet. Managing perception. She had never described it that way before, but it felt accurate. Sophia looked at her. There's a difference between reputation and control. Emma raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? It's reasonable to care about your reputation. Sophia replied. You want people to experience you as reliable, honest, professional, kind. But you build a reputation through consistent behavior. You don't build it by explaining every action until nobody could possibly criticize you. Michael smiled. Because someone will always criticize you. Alex laughed. There's an encouraging thought. Everyone smiled. Sarah nodded. But it's also freeing. If perfect approval is impossible, you can stop organizing your life around achieving it. Repeat after me. I communicate clearly and let others respond. Repeat. I cannot control every opinion about me. Repeat. Consistency builds trust. Repeat. I don't need universal approval. Repeat. Excellent. Emma looked toward the window. The sky had turned dark blue. Streetlights reflected against the glass. People hurried past wearing coats and carrying bags. She thought about how many decisions were happening outside that cafe. Someone was accepting a job. Someone was leaving one. Someone was ending a relationship. Someone was beginning one. Someone was saying yes. Someone was finally saying no. And almost every meaningful decision carried the possibility of disappointing someone. Emma turned back toward the table. I think I've been treating disappointment like evidence. Sarah looked interested. Evidence of what? That I've done something wrong. Sophia smiled gently. That's an important distinction. Emma continued. If someone is disappointed because I can't help them, I immediately feel guilty. If someone disagrees with my decision, I assume I need to reconsider. If someone seems unhappy with me, I start explaining. Michael nodded. But another person's emotion isn't automatically a verdict on your behavior. Emma smiled. Exactly. Sarah added. Someone can be disappointed, and you can still have made a reasonable decision. Someone can be frustrated, and your boundary can still be appropriate. Someone can disagree, and your reasoning can still be sound. And, she paused, you can be confident and still discover that you were wrong. Emma laughed. So basically, nothing is simple. Everyone laughed. Pretty much, Alex replied. Sophia smiled. That's why emotional maturity isn't about finding rules that work every time. It's about developing judgment. Repeat after me. Discomfort is not always evidence of wrongdoing. Repeat. Another person's disappointment does not automatically make my decision wrong. Repeat. I can care without abandoning my boundaries. Repeat. Excellent. Michael looked at Emma. Can I give you a challenge? Emma smiled. I'm starting to become suspicious of challenges. Just for 1 week. What is it? Every time you're about to give a long explanation. Pause. Emma nodded. And ask yourself, Michael continued, am I adding information? Or am I asking for approval? The table became quiet. Emma slowly smiled. That's actually useful. Sarah nodded. Very useful. Alex pulled out his phone. I'm writing that down. Sophia laughed. So am I. Michael smiled proudly. This may be the greatest moment of my life. Everyone laughed. Emma repeated the question quietly. Am I adding information? Or asking for approval? Sarah nodded. That question doesn't mean explanations are bad. Sometimes additional context is exactly what a conversation needs. But if you're adding your fourth reason, your third apology, and your second disclaimer, Alex interrupted, there's probably something else happening. Sarah laughed. Probably. Repeat after me. Am I adding useful information? Repeat. Or, am I seeking approval? Repeat. I can pause before explaining more. Repeat. Excellent. Sophia looked thoughtful. There's another challenge I'd add. Emma looked at her. What is it? Notice what happens after you stop talking. Emma smiled. That sounds strange. It isn't. Sophia replied. People who over-explain often struggle with the silence that follows a clear statement. Sarah nodded immediately. That's a very important point. Sophia continued. You say, I won't be available this weekend. Then there's silence. And suddenly your brain says, explain why. Tell them what you're doing. Prove you're actually busy. Make sure they aren't offended. So you keep talking. Emma laughed. That's exactly what happens. Michael smiled. The ability to tolerate that silence is part of confidence. Alex nodded. Say what you mean. Then, let the sentence exist. Sarah smiled. I love that. Let the sentence exist. Repeat after me. I won't be available this weekend. Repeat. That timeline won't work for me. Repeat. I see the situation differently. Repeat. Now pause. No apology. No unnecessary explanation. No immediate attempt to make the sentence softer. Just allow it to exist. Excellent. Emma laughed. That silence felt longer than it probably was. Sarah smiled. Exactly. Silence often feels longer when you're anxious. Michael nodded. But the other person may not experience it negatively at all. Sophia added. They may simply be thinking. Emma looked around the table. So much of this comes back to tolerating discomfort. Sarah nodded. I think that's one of the foundations of confidence. Confidence doesn't remove discomfort. It changes your relationship with it. Alex looked interested. Explain. Sarah thought for a moment. An insecure person may think, I feel uncomfortable, so something must be wrong. A confident person can think, I feel uncomfortable, but I can stay here long enough to understand what's actually happening. Michael smiled. That's useful, far beyond communication. Absolutely. Sarah replied. It's useful in negotiations, relationships, leadership, public speaking, conflict, almost everywhere. Repeat after me. I can feel uncomfortable and remain calm. Repeat. I don't need to react immediately. Repeat. Confidence allows me to stay present. Repeat. Excellent. The cafe was beginning to empty. The waiter quietly collected cups from nearby tables. Alex checked the time. We've been here for hours. Michael smiled. And Emma only explained herself for about half of them. Emma laughed. Progress. Sarah looked at her. So, after everything we've discussed today, why do confident people explain themselves less? Emma thought carefully. This time, she didn't rush. She didn't search for the most impressive answer. She simply waited until the thought became clear, because they know the difference between clarity and control. Sarah smiled. Emma continued. They explain when information is useful. They apologize when they've genuinely done something wrong. They listen when someone raises a valid concern. They change their mind when better information appears. They take responsibility for mistakes. But they don't keep talking simply because someone might disagree with them. Michael nodded. Emma continued. They understand that another person's reaction belongs partly to that person. They don't need every decision to be approved. They don't need every disagreement to disappear. And they don't treat every uncomfortable conversation like a threat. Sophia smiled. I think you've answered the question. Alex laughed. And without over-explaining. Everyone laughed. Emma smiled. Maybe I'm learning. Sarah looked around the table. I think there's one sentence worth remembering from today. Everyone waited. Confidence isn't having nothing to explain. She paused. It's knowing when you've explained enough. Nobody spoke. The sentence didn't need anything added to it. Today's native tip. At an advanced C1-C2 level, one of the most useful communication skills is learning to end an explanation naturally. Native speakers often use phrases such as, that's the main reason. That's what led me to that decision. Given the circumstances, that's what made the most sense. Or simply, that's where I stand. These expressions signal that your explanation is complete. You don't need to keep adding reasons simply because silence follows. Remember that concise does not mean rude, direct does not mean aggressive, and confident does not mean inflexible. The goal is clear: respectful communication without unnecessary self-defense. Repeat after me. That's the main reason. Repeat. That's what led me to that decision. Repeat. Given the circumstances, that's what made the most sense. Repeat. That's where I stand. Repeat. Excellent. Now, it's time for today's listening challenge. Listen carefully, Emma says. Confident people know the difference between clarity and control. What does she mean? A. Confident people refuse to explain their decisions. B. Confident people communicate their reasoning clearly, but accept that they cannot control how everyone reacts or whether everyone agrees. C. Confident people always convince others to accept their point of view. The correct answer is B. Excellent. The group finally stood and gathered their things. Outside, the city was glowing under the evening lights. Emma slipped her notebook into her bag. Before leaving, she opened it one last time. There were several sentences on the page. Not every disagreement is a conflict. Not every question is an accusation. Not every change of mind is a defeat. She added one final sentence. Not every decision needs a defense. Then she closed the notebook. The next morning, Emma would return to work. There would be more emails, more meetings, more requests, more disagreements, and probably more moments when she felt the familiar urge to explain herself until everyone understood. She knew that habit wouldn't disappear overnight. But now she had a different question to ask herself. Am I adding useful information? Or am I asking for approval? Sometimes she would need to explain more. Sometimes she would need to apologize. Sometimes she would discover that she had been wrong. And sometimes she would simply need to stop talking. Because confidence wasn't about refusing to explain yourself. It wasn't about becoming cold. It wasn't about ignoring other people's feelings. It was about communicating with enough clarity to say what mattered, enough humility to listen when new information appeared, and enough self-trust to know when nothing more needed to be said. Thank you for spending this time with us on SpeakWise podcast. If today's conversation helped you think differently about confidence, boundaries, disagreement, and the way you communicate in English, subscribe to SpeakWise podcast and join us for more advanced C1-C2 English listening practice. Here, we don't just learn more English. We learn how to use English to think more deeply, communicate more naturally, and handle the conversations that actually matter. Until next time, listen carefully, speak clearly, stay open to changing your mind, and remember, you don't have to explain everything. Sometimes, you've already said enough.